As China gears up to host this year's Winter Olympic Games in February, many are calling this game as a genocide game or Nazi games. Let's find out why.
How can Beijing be allowed to host the Olympics, given that they are committing genocide against the Uyghurs?
I'm here to add my voice and speak out about what is happening in Tibet.
The decision to allow Beijing to host the 2022 Winter Olympics was announced in July 2015 at the 128th IOC session held in Kuala Lumpur, making China the only country in the world to host both the Winter and Summer Olympics. Criticism followed this decision as it did in 2008 due to China's poor human rights record.
This year, Beijing is hosting the Winter Olympic, and there are many issues which international communities need to talk about. In fact, by giving chances to Beijing to host the Beijing Olympic itself is I think, we'll need to understand where China is right now, and were they able to commit themselves to preserve and to confirm with their own human rights issues inside China, and particularly in the occupied Tibet. If you look at 2008 Olympic, there were lots of sentiments, there were lots of protests happened, and during that time China has made a commitment to improve the human rights situations in China. Somehow, one decade has passed, and if you look right now in China, particularly if you look at Tibet as a case, it's worsening. There are lots of issues which are happening inside Tibet, which is very critical for the sustenance of the Tibetan identity, Tibetan culture, Tibetan religion, and as a whole, it is just like the re-emergence of the cultural revolution.
Recently, we have seen, last year actually, Kuntu Jimba and Tenzin Nyima, a 19-year-old monk, was beaten and murdered in Chinese detention camp and in prison. They were murdered, and then we have seen like recent arrest of Tibetan writers and scholars and huge suppression against Tibetan language right activists and environmentalists. So given all these factors, we are shocked and appalled that IOC continues to keep that blindsided and take it for granted. And it's sad reality, as I said earlier, this game will continue.
Firstly, Winter Olympics 2022, which is going to happen in Beijing, as part of international politics, the elite countries who recognize each other as free and independent countries do not recognize Tibet. And it is for their mutual benefit, which includes trade, human rights, and then sports. Nowhere is there any mention of Tibet or any of the China-occupied countries. By default, in itself, is a politics.
In the grand history of the Olympics, people in the United States and Europe called for the boycott of the 1936 Berlin Olympic Games. Many called it a Nazi Games, as Adolf Hitler used the Games to stage the glory of Germany under his rule and propagated the Nuremberg Law, which was anti-Semitic and racist law. Beijing Olympics is labeled as Genocide Games with a reference to the camps in Xinjiang that activists compared to Nazi Germany's concentration camps, where millions of German dictator Adolf Hitler's political opponents and Jews were held prisoners or killed between 1933 to 1945. In April 2021, the Human Rights Watch published a report titled "Break Their Lineage, Break Their Roots," which concluded that human rights crimes against Uyghurs and other Muslims in Xinjiang in recent years have reached unprecedented levels that make the Chinese government guilty of the worst human rights crackdown in China since the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989. Researchers estimate nearly 400 re-education camps, detention centers, and prisons in Xinjiang.
In this 21st century, we are still witnessing the ongoing genocide and crimes against humanity, and especially with what we have seen, almost 1.8 to 3 million Uyghurs are forced into labor camps and internment camps, being subject to extreme political indoctrination. And this is something that we have also witnessed happening in Tibet as well. We have seen how Tibet as a nation was converted into this high-tech surveillance, and we now call it as the world's largest open-air prison in the world. And we also know that Tibet has been used, and it continues to get used as the laboratory for China to test and improve their tactics and systems of mass surveillance. And right now they have successfully created this so-called police state with extreme restriction, where people are not allowed to leave Tibet, and at the same time virtually no one is allowed to go in. So given all this factor, what we believe is this is something that we have seen in the past as well, with what the Nazis have been doing and what they have done to the Jewish community. China is not at all worthy of hosting such prestigious game, because Olympics is something that stands for unity, that stands for harmony and mutual respect. But we all know China is something that stands against, like, totally opposite of that principle and objectives of the Olympics.
I wish that all the countries now see reason to protest and also stand their ground and not submit to Xi Jinping's dictatorship. Xi Jinping may be able to do that on the Chinese people, on China's occupied countries, but at least the free, independent countries know what Xi Jinping is doing within China and outside. And therefore now it's time for moral ground and for political gains, and also in the interest of global peace, that people should come together and stand against this dictatorship.
Prior to the Olympic Games in Beijing in 2008, Tibet was the main battleground for the Boycotts campaign, focusing on China's hardline policies in Tibet. A pan-Tibetan protest that year led to a brutal crackdown. As a result, a number of Tibetans were arbitrarily arrested, sentenced to long prison terms without any legal grounds, and many even died in Chinese custody. With intensified violations of their rights, the following years saw 155 Tibetans in Tibet resorting to self-immolations in protest against the repressive policies of the Chinese government.
These young student activists are going to be here all day outside of the White House until Monday night, until Xi Jinping and Biden's virtual summit, which will be the first time that they have met. And so they're here educating folks on what's going on inside Tibet, East Turkestan, Hong Kong, and they're planning on being here all night.
In the last few months, over 180 human rights groups issued a letter encouraging governments to engage in a diplomatic boycott of the Olympics over these abuses. So far, 10 countries have announced diplomatic boycott of the Games.
The Biden administration will not send any diplomatic or official representation to the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics and Paralympic Games, given the PRC's ongoing genocide and crimes against humanity in Xinjiang and other human rights abuses.
But of course the human rights abuses in Xinjiang and the many other issues that Australia has consistently raised.
It's been very clear that concerns around arbitrary detention are real and are shared by many dozens of countries around the world, which is why we saw such tremendous participation and sign on to our declaration against arbitrary detention.
There will be effectively a diplomatic boycott of the Winter Olympics in Beijing.
When we first began our campaign, we called for a total boycott of Beijing Olympics. But then we also saw that it's extremely crucial for the world leaders and the governments to join this call as well. So that's why we came up with this calling for diplomatic boycott. Because why we chose to do that is because we believe that governments have the power to push back China's bullying tactics, and at the same time to keep a check on China's human rights violations. For example, with recent announcements by US, UK, Lithuania, New Zealand and Australian government, China was obviously agitated, and they were so-called official statements by the Chinese Communist government, which clearly shows that they are not happy with that, and that has definitely made an impact on them. That's why we believe that countries like the world leaders and the government should take part in that. At the same time, we also would like to request other countries who are yet to join this campaign that if they continue to keep a blind side, this will only mean that they are complicit and they are in fact emboldening and encouraging China to continue with their crimes against humanity and their human rights violations.
It is very important to show that the world is concerned with the Beijing Olympic. And one of the things which they have to show is that to have a diplomatic boycott. And if you look at Olympic, this is the moment for the Olympians, for the sports person, to show it's a opportunity for them to showcase their skills and their sportsmanship. So, but the problem is with the host. So I think it's a pressure tactics which have been used by the international communities to tell China that they do not deserve such events, and China, with their commitments which they have made, there is a serious concern for them to fulfill those commitments even at this moment.
See, call for boycott of Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics is a moral call. It's a call made by every individual. And deep in the heart, even those athletes who are going there to participate in Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics, there is an inner calling in themselves that for their own championship, they may be going there to participate, but they know deep in the heart they are going to a country who does not play by international law, by international norms in terms of human rights. And therefore it should be a call for all of us. I would like to see a really joyful Winter Olympics anywhere but in China.
Just in the few days from now, the world will know what the athletes decided, play or protest. Either way, the Olympic Winter Games in Beijing will certainly be remembered in the history as the Genocide Games.